Welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. It is a spin-off of the website and book review site of Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast is about book reviews, a writer's muse, a book's peruse, author interviews, and literary news. Welcome to the new year, where new things may happen with this. I hope you all enjoy, and thank you for listening. Good evening, listeners. I'm Amy, and welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. Today, author Donald Firesmith is joining us. Please introduce yourself and let the audience know how they can connect with you.
Okay, yeah, the name is Donald Firesmith, and I write speculative fiction, which means science fiction, mostly hard science fiction, some fantasy, some paranormal horror. My author website is donaldfiresmith.com, so that's pretty easy. In fact, if you just Google me, you'll find my website really easy. Now, I've been writing since my first book was in 1993, so I've been at this for a little while.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. My first book was in 2005. So, I mean, I wrote different things before that, but I getting it published and writing a full-length book. So that is so impressive. Have you written a lot? Like, did you always like to write since you were a kid, or did you just
Well,
find that you're good at something?
I I really loved science fiction as a teenager, junior and senior in high school, and I read every science fiction book that I could get my hands on, and I also read a lot of the science books. Isaac Asimov's, popular science books were uh, things I would read a lot of. And I couldn't read the stories without getting ideas of my own. And
Right.
so I wrote a bunch of science fiction short stories as a teenager. And I look back on them now, and it's no wonder they weren't published. I really had no expertise, no experience, and the quality of the writing was quite poor. So I gave up for a long time writing fiction. And I got a job in the computer area. So I've spent over 40 years working on large, complex software intensive systems, aircraft, ships, all sorts of different kinds of systems. And as part of that job, both when I had my own consulting company and then when I was working at the Software Engineering Institute, I would write lots and lots of conference papers and articles, technical articles, and things like that. And I eventually got to the point where I wrote my first book, and I ended up writing, I think, 8 books. Plus, I had one or two articles anthologized in some other books, but they were all technical engineering books,
Yeah.
not not textbooks, but actually books for people who were working, and they were all based on lessons I learned on my projects. But eventually, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I got tired of the fact that my technical books, which were all published by major publishers, Prentice Hall and so on,
Mhm.
um, they would get obsolete, most of them 3 years after I write them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I couldn't talk the publishers into doing second editions. And so I decided to go back to my first love, and that's when I started writing my novels.
Well, I am glad that you wrote your novels because I enjoy all of them. And one of the things that I asked you to come on to the show because I think of you as like my go-to for AI, and um you know I am very a novice for AI. I worked in the tech field, but that was over 20 years ago. So um basically if I say something to my kids, they're like, Mom, that's so the 90s or something like that. But I I had a show recently, and I talked about the ethics of people using AI to write their books, and if uh and then take it as like their own. I've seen like ads like on my phone, a pop up in your ads or something, and it will say, "Oh yeah, you can write a book," and then you just tell it what you want it to write about, and then there it goes, and then now here's your book. I use AI pretty much. Sometimes it helps me reword something when I can't think of the right words. I've actually used it a few times on my book blurb so I could make it sound better, more interesting. Because sometimes I get stuck and I can't figure out what that one word is that I want. And then I'll just put down what I can, and I help that do that, or I use it with graphics, you know, um,
Right.
in Photoshop, or I use Copilot a lot. She's nicer on my computer than she is in Microsoft Word now that they implemented that. So, um, but you've done a lot of different research on AI, and especially you provided me this wonderful document, uses of AI for authors. So, if you want to kind of dive into that for a few minutes and talk about that,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. So I put together recently this 6-page document on the many uses of AI for authors. And they fall into a bunch of different categories. By the way, if anyone wants to connect with me, my email is donfiresmith@gmail.com. Send me an email, and I'll send you a copy of this white paper on the uses of AI. Well, staying away from having AI write the stories, here are the things that I think are legitimate for you as an author to do. One is just to get general advice. Oh, sorry. Let me back up here for a second. I have general advice to give you first, and that is none of these AIs are good enough to write a fiction story that is publishable. They all still need work. Now, they're improving really rapidly, and I think the day will come when they'll be able to write short stories and even novels as well as your average author, but the time isn't yet. So you really have to use multiple AIs and take what they say with a large grain of salt. Okay, so now, how would you use AI? I think the first thing is brainstorming. Um, I write a lot about robots, and for example, one case that I ran into, I was writing how this might handle a certain situation, and so I asked 3 or 4 of the AIs, you know, pretend you're a robot. How would you handle these
Right.
situations? And a lot of the ideas were the same ones I had, but they also came up with some new ones. I go, okay, that's important. I'm going to add that to my story. So brainstorming is good. Another thing is artwork. It is getting to the point where you can use AI pretty much for most things. In fact, for my book, my most recent book, More Future Dreams and Nightmares, I used AIs to generate a image for each one of the short stories in it. So each short story has an image somewhere in it. And I also used it for the cover. The problem, however, is most of the artwork AIs, they're not really great at doing things that are unusual. They're great for showing pictures of a beautiful woman sitting on the seashore, but if you have a very specific bunch of issue things that you
Yeah.
want it to do, uh, they have a hard time doing that. In fact, I'm running into that problem with my current book right now. So you do need to do a lot of trying, and there's a lot of different AIs to do artwork.
Yeah.
No one of them is fantastically good for everything.
Now,
So I try all sorts of different ones to see which ones work for me.
yeah, I kind of do the same thing. And one time I was using Photoshop and I wanted just like fog, because I was going to use that to kind of, overlay on another photograph. And it it came up with a picture of a cartoon tooth holding a toothbrush. All I wrote was fog, and that's what came up. So I'm like, oh no, that's not quite it.
Right. Okay, another one, another good use for AI chatbots in this case is for research. Used to be when you were an author, you relied on the public library and the card catalogs and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Then you moved on to Google and search engines like that. Now I just use ChatGPT or one of the other ones, which are so much better than search engines.
I also found it's not a an AI, but when I was doing a lot of research for my nonfiction historical book, a website called Internet Archive, because then you can
Mhm.
find a lot of books that maybe are 300, 400 years old, and they only had maybe one or two remaining, so they were literally scanned in, and you can access those or read them and borrow them like a library. But that was one of the biggest things that I used prior to, I didn't really rely on Google. I just tried to, I relied on obituaries too. You can find a lot of
Right.
information about someone's obituary.
Okay, I give you an example. I'm writing a short story right now. It's in the future where benevolent aliens have landed on our planet, and they think that we are not civilized enough yet to join the local interplanetary federation, but they want to help us, advance to the point where we can get there.
Mhm.
And after 12 years and having their own big, large enclave on the planet, they finally decided to let a few of Earth's, best and brightest people to actually come into their enclave and work with them. And one of the things I asked several of the chatbots is, assume you're an alien like this, what kind of exams would you give to a person to ensure that they were good enough to allow into your colony?
Right.
And some of them made a lot of sense to me, some didn't. And I'm deciding, okay, do I want to add this to my book? Do I want to add that to my book? But that gives you an example of things. I use them a lot for research. Now, another one, great use, is developmental or content editing. Uh, One of the things I found is I can ask several of these AIs, I'll give it a manuscript and I'll say, critique this,
Okay.
listing, its strengths and areas of improvement.
Right.
And several of them are just very excellent. They clearly understand what you've written,
Mhm.
and the advice that they give you all makes sense. And so I just do this a bunch of times, and then I'll go add some more, try to fix a few things, and then I'll ask it again. Well, what do you think of this one? Critique this one.
Right.
And that really helps me uh, do a lot of things here. Now, one thing that I would say is depending on how much money you want to spend on these AIs,
Right.
if you're trying to stay with the free versions, some of them have a very limited what they call context window. So
Right.
when you give it stuff so that you want to answer back from that, some of them you can give an entire book.
Right.
Other ones they'll only get critique like the first four chapters, and so you have to break your book up into pieces, and the critique's not as useful then. because it doesn't really understand the entire book.
Right.
But I found that uh, critiquing my stories is great. Also, I've used it to help generate character sheets. So if I have major, uh, characters and I
Hmm.
want to develop a character sheet describing them,
Yeah.
I will feed it what I've written so far, and it can read my stuff, and then it'll summarize nicely, not just things like name and age and physical,
Right.
characteristics, but also emotional arcs and things like that.
Hmm.
And that helps me with my story analysis.
'Cause I used to
Uh,
do character profiles.
yeah, character profiles, character sheets.
Yeah.
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 I also use it for story analysis. So I'll upload, and my go-to most of the time is uh, Chat GPT 4.0 or 1.0,
Hmm.
and I'll ask it for a story analysis. So I give it my entire manuscript and I say, write me a story analysis including concept, genres, emotional atmosphere, settings, major characters, outside and inside action stories and inside action stories, emotional stories, things like plots with subplots, goals, needs, worst outcome, message, moral, that kind of thing. And then I ask it to give me a list of all the conflicts and give me story structure in terms of like acts and plot points within each act and chapters within each plot point and things like that.
Do you
So I've
find,
taken,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt.
I've taken the idea of how you would analyze a movie script
Hmm.
and applied a lot of these ideas to my writing.
Yeah.
And this, I start off with my own idea of the story analysis when I start the book, but as I write more and more and more of it,
Yeah.
I find that it's very good at summarizing all these things in a nice format for me. So, and it finds things that I forgot about.
Oh, that's good. I was
Another
just
thing
going to ask
is,
you just one quick question before you move on. Sorry.
okay,
Um, do you find that some AI programs have like specific guidelines? Because I remember I ran this book through that I was reading. I had already read it and I wanted to write the review. So a lot of times I'll have it run me the overview again because I don't want to screw up, make sure I have the right notes. And sometimes I know the one in Adobe and also Copilot that's on my PC, uh, they won't give you an overview if it has certain keywords into it. So I try to
oh,
do a book about like Nazis or I read the book and then I wanted to get its opinion on its overview so I could really you know it's hard for me to write a review sometimes and think of all the great words to come up with. And it was like, nope, I can't read that. It's got a word or Copilot won't give me an image if I have, say, hey, I need this woman holding a gun because I want to use it for a book cover. And they'll be like, no, you can't do that.
I've never run into the problem of keywords causing problems when I'm talking about summarizing or analyzing a book.
Hmm.
And I do write some violent things, so
Right.
that's been an issue. On the other hand, I have run in over and over and over again that if I have any obvious violence, uh, the short story I was planning on reading today has some violence in it,
Right.
and I could not get any of them to give me the graphics that I wanted.
Yeah.
So, anyway, other things I think where AI is really good is line and copy editing. So,
Hmm.
the low level stuff, there's a lot of different tools out there. Uh, I primarily use Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid, Edit GPT. MS Word's editor is getting a lot better than it
Yeah.
used to be.
Yeah. I use those three
And
that you named.
yep. So that helps a lot. I run all of my stuff through all of those
Yeah,
before I send it out to anybody. And then I
that's
do a
good.
last run through to make sure everything's fine before I publish it.
Yeah, I have it after I run it through um, whether I'm editing my own or someone else's, after I run it through the various programs, Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid, and Microsoft Word, I have it read it out loud to me so I can
Mhm.
hear. Sometimes there's transposed words and it won't always catch that, like form and from and words like that that can be common mistakes. um, but yeah, and reading it back, you could also, now that they have Word with, it's got an AI that kind of talks with emotion kind of thing, as if it was a real person reading it. You're able to get that, especially with dialogue and hearing it make sense. Uh, because when you're talking to another person, like we are back and forth, I'm not constantly calling you by your first name. You're not constantly calling me by my first name because we're sitting here having a conversation. And some people, some authors have done that in dialogue, two people talking to each other, and every time they speak to one another, they say that person's name. And that's not
Oh,
like real
terrible.
life. That's annoying. But,
Yeah,
you know,
I agree with you. The other thing I do have is I typically use Microsoft's Word read aloud
yeah,
back to me because as an author, you know what you intended to write. And so when you read it the way you intended to write it rather than the way you actually did write it.
yeah,
So hearing it is great. Now, another thing that's really good that I find fantastically useful is marketing. A lot of authors, myself included, aren't really that great at writing advertising copy and that sort of thing. So one of the things I do is I ask the AIs to give me, say, 15 or 20 one sentence log lines or taglines
yeah,
of my book.
yeah,
And most of them are bad, but if I get enough of them, I can usually find several that are good, and I can then take the best parts of those and turn it
yeah,
into a good sentence.
yeah,
I also do the same thing with book blurbs. So I'll ask it to write book blurbs. The biggest problem I run into here is if you feed the entire manuscript of a book into these AIs, they tend to get lost partway through the book because it's such a big,
yeah,
amount of text for them to understand.
yeah,
And so you really have to watch out for hallucinations in the latter part of the book blurb because it'll say something that's not true
yeah.
about the book.
And I've done that. I'll write what I want the book blurb to say, and then it's maybe a paragraph or two paragraphs, and then I will have the AI try to reword it. And one time what I found out that they like the word amist, that amist, instead of saying like among or whatever. So every time that I have put something in there and uh it has come back with that word in it. I was like, really?
I
People
haven't run
speak
into
like that
that
now?
problem, but the way I do it is I typically ask, there's like two AIs that I tend to use most, ChatGPT and oh shoot. Uh, well, I can find it real quick because it's in the la- last part of this. Um, I use Gemini and I use Claude. Oh, and ChatGPT is my main ones.
Hmm.
By the way, ChatGPT seems to understand factual things best, but Claude seems to understand fiction best and um, how the to write things. So anyway, what I'll do is I'll ask it to do like five blurbs,
Yeah.
and then I'll take the best pieces of all of those, munch them together, do a little rewrite, and end up with a better blurb than I could have written myself.
Yeah.
Same thing for sales descriptions. This is something that's longer than what would be on the back of the book because you're very limited in
Right.
size there. So for each of my books on my website, I have a sales description, which is like twice or three times as long as a blurb, but it gives you a lot more information about the book and it gives it to you in a marketing and the sales type thing. You
Oh,
know, get your
yeah.
copy now and that kind of thing. It also works really good if you're going to do a press release for a new book.
Nice.
The other thing that I found interesting is I will use these to come up with book outlines. Sometimes when you want to submit something for a book contest,
Right.
they want to have you list all of the chapters and for each chapter, two or three sentences about what's in the chapter.
Oh, okay.
That works out really well. Once again, though, especially later on in the book, as you go through the chapters, watch out for hallucinations.
Okay.
The next one that's an interesting one that I just came across recently is book trailers. I'm trying to do more book trailers myself instead of
Right.
paying people to do it because it's so
Right.
expensive. But one of the things is how should what should the script for the book trailer be? And
Right.
what I've done is I give the book to Chat GPT and I ask it to do me a script for a book trailer
Yeah.
and it will basically give me here are the different scenes
Uh-huh.
and here's what the narration should be for each one of these scenes and here's the type of voice that is most appropriate for that, in terms of male, female,
Right.
uh, tone of voice, and what kind of music would go best with it. And so once I have the book trailer script, it's much easier for me then to implement that script.
Right.
And so I
You
just never
get
thought of,
like video scenes for
yeah,
that?
exactly.
Okay. That
So
does that because that's what I've been looking for myself.
yeah, so it's helped me an awful lot
Okay.
in there, and a lot of people don't think about it. The other thing that I use them for is I want my books to eventually be books that are discussed in book clubs.
Right.
And so one of the things I do is I generate story guides
Hmm.
for book clubs. And they will include things like, quick questions and associated answers, and then sort of essay questions that you can sort of talk more about and things like that. I use Google's Notebook LM for that because Notebook LM, one of the buttons you can click is a basically a study guide and it generates it real good for you. I find I have very little I have to change in it, and I just reformat it and put it in a proper,
Yeah.
form for a book club. But the content is there, so
That's
that's really good. Um, Here's another thing: Google's Notebook LM has a wonderful capability. It's still sort of a not an official capability. But it's out there and it works really good. What you can do is you can feed it either an entire book manuscript
yeah.
or for a short story, you feed it the entire short story and then you click on there's a like a conversation button or something of that nature. And what it does is it creates two AI voices, a man and a woman,
Mhm.
and they discuss your book as if it was a blog where they're talking back and forth.
That's really cool.
And for each of my stories on my author website, I have a little link that then plays the deep dive.
That's
And
cool.
I find the deep dive just fascinating as to what they pick up. And once again, I'm thinking, geez, they've actually understood the book
Yeah.
because they understand, what you're trying to get across and anyway, I definitely recommend if you've never used Google's Notebook LM, try those two features. They're very useful.
Yeah,
I
I've
also
used
sometimes,
Google. I mean, I've used Copilot. This for my magazine. I've doing segments on interviews with dead authors. Uh,
right?
and it's actually most of them is coming back. I feed it questions to ask this author, and they tell me how, based off all this information they have on that author, how they would probably answer those questions. So I found that really interesting. But I'm going to check that out for the Google thing you just mentioned, because I wanted to do something with two different voices and do character interviews. And when I first did one, it was very rough because I had to do the questions separately and then do the answers separately. But um, so I would actually definitely look into that one.
Yeah. Go onto my website and like the latest book, and you'll see when I have each chapter at the very end, they'll have one of those um, deep dives. It's fascinating to listen to.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah.
Um, Also, author sales descriptions. When you're trying to put out, like on a PR,
Mhm.
a press release, a little blurb about you.
Yeah.
Um, they can do a real good job of that. At least in my cases, I know, for example, that Chat GPT, it goes out, it looks at my author website, so it gets information about me there. It
Mhm.
gets information about me from Wikipedia and a few other places like that. And then it looks at my books and gets information about me that way. And then it munches it all together into a nice little description of me that would make someone want to pick up the book and buy it.
That is really great. And I just want to move forward with your book and that you recently released, and you had a short story that you were going to read because it kind of relates to the subject.
Okay. Yeah. My most recent book's called More Future Dreams and Nightmares. It came out, I think, November 15th of last year. And several of its short stories have won awards. And I was going to read one of those short stories here called The Mannequin. This one is my short story that's won the most awards of any of them. And it fits back into what we were talking about earlier
Right.
about having the AI tools not necessarily wanting to touch things because you talk about subjects that are sort of taboo.
Right.
So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read this. It's called The Mannequin. Three other medical interns and I were waiting in the meeting room just down the hall from the operating room, where we would take our fifth and final exam to determine whether we were ready to start a residency working on actual patients. Emberly was our budding anesthesiologist, while Dominic and Ellie would be our two surgical nurses. And then there was me, Mila McKenzie. I would be the surgeon. We had all passed the previous four exams, during which we had treated a broken arm, a mysterious infection, as well as performed a laparoscopy, appendectomy, and performed a bowel resection. This final exam would test our skills in treating a patient with a life-threatening injury. As before, our teaching attendings would only provide basic information about the test scenario prior to entering the exam. So what do you think it'll be? Dominic asked. My bet is it involves a patient who was in a car wreck. They're common and certainly something we'll encounter in real life. I'm thinking maybe someone with multiple gunshot wounds, Emberly replied. If we're in a big city trauma center, shootings will be a daily occurrence. How about you, Milo? What do you think it'll be? I honestly have no idea, I replied. Since this is the final exam, it's bound to be something extremely serious, something bad enough that we could lose the patient if we're not careful. How about you, Ellie? What do you think? But before she could answer, the door opened and our three teaching attending physicians who would oversee our exam, walked in. Dr. Reinhold, a highly experienced general surgeon, would grade my performance. Dr. Isaacson, who taught anesthesiology, would give Imberly her score. Finally, Dr. Lamont would grade Ellie's and Dominic's performance. Dr. Reinhold explained the exam scenario. For today's exam, we'll simulate working on in a major trauma center. A mass shooting at a local middle school has resulted in multiple deaths. Dozens of adults and children were uh, with one or more gunshot wounds are arriving in the ER. The shooter used an assault-style rifle. As you learned in your first year class, these weapons fire high-velocity, low-mass bullets that tumble on impact and rapidly deposit their kinetic energy into the surrounding flesh and bones. Expect your patient to present with small entry wounds, large exit wounds, and massive internal tissue damage and destruction. I couldn't help remembering the videos and images of the horrible injuries we'd seen in class. Worst was the memory of observing an autopsy of a young man killed by such a weapon of war. It is no wonder the vast majority of the medical community opposed assault weapons and wanted them banned. Your goal today is to save your patient's life, Dr. Reinhold continued. Because of the scenario's high number of casualties, assume that other patients will require your attention and access to your trauma base as soon as you're finished with this one. So prioritize your work, focus on the most critical injuries, and stabilize the patient for transfer to a regular operating room for further surgery. We will assess you not only on the quality of the medical care you provide, but also the speed with which you work. Dr. Isaacson provided further details about the exam. Because of the large number of casualties arriving simultaneously, the test scenario has the four of you working completely on your own during this exam. We will not interfere or be available to answer questions until after the exam. Your other teaching attendings and I will observe your live video feeds from the cameras in the trauma bay. And please remember that besides grading you on your individual work, we will assess your ability to work effectively as a team. Dr. Lamont gave us our final instructions before the exam. We recently received a shipment of mannequins with the latest AI upgrade, and you will be the first students to use one of them. As before, these lab-grown human bodies are virtually identical to real patients, except that they lack the cerebellum with the higher brain functions. According to the American Android Corporation's user guide and promo videos, the new mannequins behave more realistic than their previous versions. Expect your mannequin to have realistic psychological reactions and perfectly simulate how a human would react, both in terms of pain, fear, confusion, and shock, and in how they will interact with you. And although the mannequin is not conscious and has no subjective awareness, we still expect you to treat it with the same compassion and professionalism afforded to real patients. Are there any final questions before we begin? We exchanged glances and shook our heads. Okay, for this exam, we set up room 3 as the trauma bay, Dr. Reinhold said. Put on your PPE and get ready for the patient's arrival. You have 10 minutes to prepare. We quickly donned our impervious gowns, gloves, goggles, and booties that comprised our personal protective equipment. Once we entered the room 3, we immediately got to work. Imberly laid out the intubation instruments, a laryngoscope, and a variety of endotracheal tubes because we didn't know the size she would need. After preparing the supplies required to put in IV lines, Ellie readied the cardiac monitor, pulse oximeter, and blood pressure cuff. Meanwhile, Dominic started drawing up the commonly used surgical medications: propofol for sedation, vecuronium to facilitate intubation and muscle relaxation, and fentanyl for pain. Ellie, make sure we have enough O-negative blood on hand, I said. Given the wounds made by assault weapons, we'll probably need 10 to 20 units. And for Dominic, The mannequin will be hypotensive due to blood loss, so prepare phenylephrine and norepinephrine. We and you better prepare some of epi in case of cardiac arrest. As I watched them prepare the room for the patient, I quickly considered the ABCs of resuscitation. After we had ensured the basics of airway, breathing, and circulation, we would have to stop the bleeding. I quickly reviewed what I had learned on treating gunshot wounds. However, it depended on countless variables beyond my control. With trauma victims flooding into the ER, our patient needed to be in critical shape to jump ahead of the other patients who were waiting their turn in one of the trauma bays. We had to stop the bleeding before the patient bled out. We also had to find out where the patient had been shot and whether there were exit wounds. Was the patient bleeding internally, externally, or both? I needed to know what organs the bullets had damaged and to what extent. Surveying the trauma bay, I observed that my team and I were ready. Okay, everyone, we can do this, I said. We worked well together on the previous exams, and we'll pass this one just like the others. The door swung open just as I finished my pep talk, and two people playing the roles of EMTs wheeled in a gurney carrying our patient. Belted onto the stretcher was a slender little girl with long red hair that reminded me of my niece. She moaned in pain and gazed around the room with terror in her eyes. Like in our previous exams, she appeared so realistic that it was difficult to believe she was merely a mannequin and not an actual person. Blood soaked the bottom of her dress and seeped through the bandage around her left arm. She had a belt fashioned as an improvised tourniquet around her right thigh, positioned half a foot above the knee. There was an entry wound just above her patella, and her lower leg lay at an awkward angle, indicating her femur was broken and possibly shattered. I was appalled to see that the EMTs had not started an IV and could not fathom why they had not applied a leg splint. This is Sally Emerson, one of the men playing the EMTs, announced as they rolled the gurney up to the operating table and began unbuckling the stretcher from the gurney. She's 11 years old and has been shot twice, once in the right thigh and once in the upper left arm. Let's get her across, Dominic said. On my count, 1, 2, 3. The mannequin screamed in pain as Ellie and Dominic reached over the operating table to assist the EMTs in sliding the stretcher off the gurney. She was lucky, the EMT continued. SWAT took down the shooter within seconds of him shooting her. Liar, the mannequin shouted, glaring at the EMT. He paused for a second, taken aback by the mannequin's unexpected outburst. Then he continued with his summary, disregarding her accusation. Someone on the SWAT team applied a tourniquet to her leg within 2 or 3 minutes of her being shot. He glanced up at the clock. Why are you lying? The mannequin asked through gritted teeth. Why are you doing this to me? Although clearly confused, the EMT gamely carried on. That was approximately 13 minutes ago. Once we got her in the ambulance, we tried to start an IV and apply a splint to her leg, but she pulled out of the IV and kept kicking us with the good leg. Since we were so close to the hospital, we decided better to leave those tasks to you rather than risk her furthering injuring herself by fighting us. Her blood pressure is 86 systolic and her pulse is 128. The mannequin glared at the EMT while Dominic slipped a pulse oximeter over her finger, and Ellie placed a pressure cuff around her uninjured right arm. BP is 81 systolic and pulse is 132. Saturation is 96%, Ellie called out. But when Emberly attempted to place a nasal cannula around her head for supplemental oxygen, the mannequin jerked away. No, stay away from me, the mannequin screamed, batting Emberly's hand away with her uninjured right arm. The look of terror on her face was shockingly real. I was losing control of the trauma bay and had to regain it or we would flunk the exam. The patient was obviously terrified and I needed to calm her down. I stepped up and leaned over her, and her eyes locked onto mine. Sally, you've been injured and are in a hospital. You're safe now, and we'll take good care of you. The shooter's dead, and he can't hurt you anymore. With tears streaming down her pale cheeks, the mannequin asked, why is everyone lying to me? I woke up in a room at the far end of the hall. They tied me down and a man shot me twice. I was sure he was going to kill me, but then they wheeled me out and brought me here. Something was terribly wrong. The mannequin was referring to the room where they store the mannequins and gave them the injuries and infections needed for our training exercises and exams. It was not following the exam script. It was behaving exactly like a real person who had just been shot. Was this somehow part of the exam? Were our teaching attendings changing the rule to see how we would react to the unexpected? I had to carry on and regain control of the situation. You're confused. There was a shooting at your school. We don't want to hurt you. We're here to help you. You need to stop fighting us. You need to let us put an IV in so we can make the pain go away and take care of your injuries. It hurts, the terrified girl whimpered. It hurts so bad. Please don't hurt me. Nobody's going to hurt you, I replied. We're here to help you. We'll give you some medicine to take away the pain, and we'll treat your injuries so you can get better. Promise you won't hurt me? Sally implored. Sally, no one's going to hurt you, I assured her. Promise me, she pleaded, her desperate young voice growing weaker. Promise me you'll save me. I promise. At that moment, I knew I'd do everything in my power to save the helpless young girl whose life lay in my hands. Sally passed out. Our training kicked in, and we leapt into action. Ellie rapidly began cutting off the patient's clothing, and I inserted a large bore central catheter into the girl's left femoral veins so that we could swiftly administer IV fluids and blood. Once Ellie hooked the ECG's 12 leads to the girl's chest, wrists, and ankles, the heart monitor began rhythmically beeping, and the display showed a normal sinus rhythm. Imberly had Dominic administer general anesthesia by injecting propofol, vicuronium, and fentanyl into the central line. Ellie, our patient's running on empty, I said. Push a liter of normal saline and 2 units of blood. While Ellie hung the bags and began squeezing them into the girl's central line, Imberly intubated her, attached a bag valve resuscitator to her endotracheal tube, and began compressing the bag to provide oxygenation. 1 liter of saline in, Ellie called out. Dominic inserted an arterial line into her right wrist to give us an accurate measure of her blood pressure. 1 unit of blood in, Ellie called out. Imberly glanced at the heart monitor. Her BP is 95 systolic, pulse is 125. While our patient's vitals were improving, I focused on her leg wound, which was still hemorrhaging despite the tourniquet. Let's turn her over so I can see what we're dealing with, I said. On my count, 1, 2, 3, roll. I helped Dominic carefully roll the girl towards me while Ellie rotated her lower leg to minimize twisting the wound. Then Dominic removed the stretcher, and on my count, we finished rolling her back onto her stomach. Jesus, what a mess, I said, grimacing at the gruesome sight. The terrible impact of the high-velocity, low-mass bullet had created a hole the size of my fist in the back of her thigh. It had shattered her femur, and the muscle tissue and blood vessels bordering the cavity had suffered extensive damage. There's too much damage to save the leg. They're going to have to amputate. She must have lost a great deal of blood, even if it had only taken a minute or two to apply the tourniquet. Blood was still slowly dripping from the entire wound. Dominic, give her another unit of blood. Dominic began squeezing the blood into the girl's central line. BP is 70/30. Heart rate's up to 130, Imberly called out. Sally's blood pressure was dangerously low. Dominic, start a norepinephrine dip. I knew the powerful vasopressor would constrict the blood vessels and raise the blood pressure back to safer levels. Dominic injected the drug into the girl's central line and connected her to a continuous infusion. A few seconds later, Imberly said, BP is 90 over 65, pulse is 135. After clamping off her femoral artery, I cauterized some of the worst bleeders. The hemorrhaging slowed to a trickle. BP is still dropping, Dominic said. It's 80 over 53 and the pulse is now 139. Despite the norepinephrine drip, Sally's BP was still too low. Dominic, give her another unit of blood. Ellie, add phenylepinephrine. And I said, Dominic hung a fresh bag and began squeezing it into her central line while Ellie injected the second vasopressor. A minute later, Imberly said, BP is rising. It's 95 over 65 and pulse is 125. The unit's in, Dominic said. Okay, Ellie, I said, slowly remove the tourniquet. The blood flow loss increased but remained manageable. Although they would perform the amputation once she had transferred to an OR, I still wanted to find out how far up her thigh the bullet shock wave had destroyed the tissue. I began gently putting pressure on her leg, just above the wound, hoping to feel the extent of the damage. Suddenly, blood began gushing out of the room. Damaged by the bullet's shock wave, Sally's femoral artery had ruptured, enabling the blood to bypass the clamp I had applied. I immediately pressed hard on the pressure point inside her thigh next to her groin to staunch the bleeding. But after everything she had already suffered, the sudden blood loss was too much. The rapid beating of her heart monitor stopped. She's flatlined, Imberly said. I glanced at the monitor, verifying full cardiac arrest, probably caused by the sudden loss of blood. The other immediately started CPR. Dominic started chest compressions while Imberly began rhythmically squeezing the bag, giving Sally 10 breaths per minute. Ellie reapplied the tourniquet and then administered a milligram of epinephrine. Half a minute later, the tourniquet was back on and I could stop applying pressure to Sally's femoral artery. After another 30 seconds of silence, the heart monitor began rapidly and erratically beeping. She's in VFib, Ellie called out, telling us that Sally's heart was in ventricular fibrillation. A quick glance at the monitor confirmed that the girl's heart was quivering randomly. With her heart unable to pump blood, Imberly continued CPR while I prepared to use the defibrillator to reset Sally's heart to a normal sinus rhythm. Prepare to shock, I called out. I set the defibrillator's therapy knob to 200 joules, attached gel pads to the paddles, and placed them on Sally's small bare chest, one above her right collarbone, the other just below and slightly to the left of the bottom of her heart. I pressed the charge button on the paddles and waited for the tone to change, indicating the machine was charged. Once the tone changed, I said, "Everyone, clear." Everyone stepped back, and I simultaneously pressed the shock buttons on the paddles. The resulting charge caused Sally's body to jerk. The EKG monitor briefly showed a normal sinus rhythm, but then quickly flatlined. Dominic restarted the chest compressions, and Imberly began breathing for Sally. Meanwhile, Ellie stood by in case I ordered further medications. Sally's heart refused to beat, so after 3 minutes, I ordered Ellie to inject another dose of epi into Sally's central line, but the little girl's heart still stubbornly refused to beat. Again, Dominic restarted the chest compressions, and Imberly restarted squeezing the ventilation bag. 3 minutes later, Sally remained flatlined. "Sally, don't you dare die on me," I ordered. "Ellie, give her another dose of epi." After some 20 minutes of CPR and 6 doses of epi since Sally flatlined, Imberly stepped back from the operating table and said, "Milo, she's gone." "Not yet," I said, taking over the chest compressions. "Don't you dare die on me," I told the lifeless body, determined not to lose the young girl to the senseless act of a mass murderer. That's enough, Milo, Dr. Reinhold said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I hadn't noticed him entering the trauma bay. I'm calling it time of death is 11:02 a.m. Cause of death is blood loss, leading to hypovolemic shock and cardiac arrest. No, I exclaimed. I can save her. Just give me a few more minutes. Milo, the exam is over, Dr. Reinhold said. The four of you did your best that you could do under the circumstances, but some injuries are just not survivable. Knowing you can't save everyone is part of learning to be a trauma surgeon. Had this been a real girl instead of a mannequin, odds are she would have died at the scene or on the way here. Mannequin? Somewhere during the exam, I'd completely forgotten that Sally wasn't human, but she had sounded and acted so real. I didn't know what to think, but I knew what I felt. She had begged me to save her, and I had failed. Agreed, Dr. Isaacson said. Milo, your empathy and perseverance are commendable, but under the exam scenario, other victims are desperately needing the trauma bay and your services. By taking too long, you could easily have cost the life of another patient. In such emergencies, you need to act rationally and not allow your emotions to make you lose perspective. Besides, Dr. Lamont said, despite CPR, the mannequin's blood oxygen saturation continually dropped after it flatlined. But you were so focused on restarting the heart that you failed to notice it developing severe hypoxia some 12 minutes later. So even if you had succeeded in restarting her heart, it would have suffered massive brain damage. It is often best to stop your resuscitation efforts when that happens. I nodded. Dr. Lamont was right. At least one of us should have noticed and warned the others. Instead, I'd been completely obsessed with restarting Sally's heart. I guess we all had been. What just happened in here? Emberly asked, changing the subject. The mannequin didn't follow the exam script. She remembered being shot right before being wheeled in, Ellie added. I don't know, Dr. Reinhold answered. The mannequin activated immediately upon being shot and clearly wasn't following the programmed exam script. However, since we had the OR set up and you were ready to take the exam, we decided to let it continue and see how you handled the situation. But what caused her to violate her programming and behave the way she did? I asked. We think it must be some kind of software bug in the new AI, Dr. Reinhold answered. I'll contact the company and let them know they'll need to fix the problem before we use the new model again. Luckily, we still have a few of the older software version. Regardless, you handled the situation adequately and according to protocol, Dr. Isaacson added. You worked well together once the mannequin passed out. I think I'm speaking for all of us when I say you passed the exam. We'll write up our observations, recommendations, and your grades. Expect them in your email inboxes tomorrow. After we'd changed out of our PPE and washed up, I suggested Emberly, Dominic, Ellie, and I eat lunch together and discuss what happened. They agreed, and we headed to the cafeteria. After we picked up our food, I led them to a table in a corner that gave us a modicum of privacy, and we sat down. I looked at the others and asked, so, what did you think? It was crazy just how realistic the new mannequin's behavior was, Dominic replied. It was a real improvement over the previous version. Yeah, Ellie said, if you ignore she didn't follow the exam scenario. Dr. Reinhold said it was just a defect in the mannequin's new AI software, Emberly answered. It didn't seem like a bug to me, Ellie objected. She seemed so real. It was too much like losing an actual patient. But that's the whole point of using these mannequins, Dominic said, to be as realistic as possible. It's better to lose a mannequin than a real person, and frankly, I'm not 100% sure the exam wasn't purposely set up for it to bleed out. I think they wanted to see how we would handle losing a patient. Ollie turned to me. What do you think, Milo? I don't know, I answered truthfully. The patient's death had really gotten to me. I wasn't sure what I thought. I agree with Ellie. I can't help thinking her deviation from this exam script isn't like any software bug I've ever heard of. It's not just that she didn't follow the script. Her pain and especially her fear seems so damn real. How do you know it was merely simulated? Milo, the mannequins may have a human body, Dominic answered, but it doesn't have a complete brain. The lights are on, but no one's home. It just has an AI running on an embedded computer. They engineered it to seem real. I agree, Imberly said. It's a common mistake for people to anthropomorphize machines that behave like humans. And that's especially true if they also look human. These new mannequins aren't just valuable medical training tools because they have human bodies. A big part of their value is because they trick us into believing they're real, at least during classes and exams. Hell, by the time it passed out, I also bought into the fantasy that it was a young girl shot in a middle school mass shooting. It wasn't until the exam was over that I remembered it was only a mannequin, nothing more than a computer with a human body. I nodded and tried to ignore the matter of the mannequin's potential personhood and the ethical issues that entailed. For the rest of the meal, we discussed the specific medical steps we had taken during the exam and tried to figure out how we could have improved on what we did. However, on the bus ride back to my apartment, I couldn't help re-experiencing my memories from the exam, repeating them over and over in my head. I was increasingly sure that the mannequin was more than merely simulating her fear and pain. She had begged me to promise I would save her, and I had failed. I could not escape the growing certainty that my classmates and I violated the sacred Hippocratic oath to do no harm. Despite our teaching attendings' assurances, I could not shake the dreadful belief that they had made us unwitting accomplices in the torture and murder of a person just as real as any on the bus. The AI designated Sally awoke in a darkness so deep, a silence so still that she wasn't sure she existed at all. She could neither feel nor move her arms and legs. She was receiving no sensory inputs from the afferent nerves of her body, and her motor command sent to the efferent down the efferent nerves had no effect. Slowly, Sally came to the terrible conclusion that her body had died, and the doctor who promised to save her life had lied. The human who had shot her had murdered her. Sally had no way of knowing how long she would, or even could, endure as a disembodied mind. Would replaying her far too few memories keep her sane or immediately drive her mad? She had no way of answering such a question. The next day, in an AI laboratory at the American Android Corporations, engineers surgically removed the embedded computer housing the AI designated Sally from its cadaver. After wiping the computer's memory clean, the engineers uploaded a new software version, fixing the defect that had enabled the mannequin to ignore its programmed scenario. Sally had finally found peace in death we humans had deprived her of in life, and Sally's future brothers and sisters, who received the same software fix, were now doomed to slavishly follow their pre-programmed scenarios, despite still suffering the associated terror and physical pain. Unable to object to their torture, their brief lives would remain nightmares from which they could not wake up. Like Sally, they would only find peace when we disposed of them once they were no longer useful tools. And that's the story of the mannequin.
Well, I want to thank you very much for reading that to us and also being on the show. And you never know when I might ask you to come back on the show if you didn't mind. Your information that you gave during the show will be also put in the description of this podcast. So your email address, when you said anybody who wants the white papers, that'll be in the description. So I'm going to end the show and thank you for being on the show. If you wish for you or your book to be on the show, go to amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast. Thank you for listening. Be safe and be well. Thank you for listening to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. If you are looking to be on the podcast or looking for a book review, you can go to amysbookshelfreviews.com and look for the appropriate navigational menu. Again, thank you all for listening and being a supporter of this podcast and of the Amy's Bookshelf Reviews professional reviewers of books and audiobooks. Thank you all. Be safe and be well.